The small cabin stood alone on the edge of the forest, just a stone's throw from where the wide river curved around a bend. Smoke rose in thin wisps from its chimney, dancing against the clear blue sky before fading away. Inside, a girl of 12 summers moved about, her hands busy with the morning's work. The girl had no mother or father to guide her. Fever had taken them both 3 seasons past, leaving her to face the world alone. Some called her the forest child, others the river girl, but she thought of herself simply as May. May was not like other children. While they played in the dusty streets of the settlement half a day's walk away, she learned the secrets of survival from the world around her. The forest became her teacher, the cabin her kingdom, and the changing seasons her only companions. On this particular morning, May woke before the sun had fully risen. She slipped from beneath her woolen blanket and stretched her arms toward the ceiling. The wooden floorboards felt cool beneath her bare feet as she padded across to stoke the dying embers in the fireplace. Another day, she whispered to herself, a habit formed from months of speaking, to no one but the walls and occasional woodland creatures that ventured near her door after eating a simple breakfast of dried berries and a corn cake left from the previous evening's baking. May gathered her collecting basket and stepped outside. The morning air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers and the earthy promise of spring growth. Her garden patch, though small, showed signs of life, green shoots pushing through dark soil where she had carefully planted seeds weeks before. May knelt beside the tender plants, her fingers gently touching each one as she checked their progress. "Grow strong," she murmured. "Winter is still a long way off, but we must be ready when it comes." The settlement folk rarely ventured this far from their cluster of buildings and farms. They viewed the river as a boundary, a dividing line between their world and the unknown territories where native people lived. To most settlers, the natives were strangers to be feared, their ways mysterious and foreign. May's parents had been different. They chose this spot for their home precisely because it stood between 2 worlds. Her father had traded with the native people occasionally, and her mother had once been helped by a native healer, when May was still a tiny baby fighting a terrible cough. They taught May that fear often comes from not understanding, not from true danger. Still, since their passing, May had seen little of either world. The settlement folk looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion when she made her infrequent trips to trade herbs and wild honey for supplies she couldn't make herself. Their whispers followed her through the streets. "That poor child, living out there all alone, isn't right. A young one so close to native territory. Someone should bring her to town, find her a proper family." But May wanted none of their pity. In town, the buildings stood too close together. The air smelled of too many people, and the constant chatter made her head spin. She preferred the honest silence of her forest home, where she could hear herself think. After tending her garden, May followed a familiar path into the woods. Her basket swung gently at her side as she moved between the trees with quiet confidence. She knew which plants to gather for medicine, which berries were safe to eat, and which mushrooms to avoid. This knowledge had been passed down from her mother, who learned some from her own family and some from watching the native people who understood the forest better than any settler. The sun climbed higher as May worked, filling her basket with early spring treasures, tender dandelion greens, wild onions, and a handful of late winter berries that had somehow survived until now. She would dry some for medicines and use others for her evening meal. Near midday, May paused by a small stream that fed into the larger river. Kneeling on the mossy bank, she cupped her hands to drink the clear, cold water. As she raised her head, a movement across the stream caught her eye, a flash of color between the trees that didn't belong to any animal she knew. May froze, her heart suddenly beating faster. She remained perfectly still, watching. After a long moment, the color moved again, and May realized she was seeing a person, someone dressed in bright cloth decorated with careful beadwork unlike anything the settlers wore. A native person, watching her from the shadows of the forest. May didn't call out or run away. Instead, she slowly stood, making her movements deliberate and calm. She raised one hand in what she hoped was a peaceful greeting, then waited. The figure, a woman perhaps not much older than May's mother had been, remained partially hidden behind a large oak tree. After what seemed like forever, she raised her hand in return, mirroring May's gesture. For a heartbeat, 2 worlds acknowledged each other across a small stream. Then, as silently as she had appeared, the woman melted back into the forest, leaving May to wonder if she had imagined the entire encounter. That night, as darkness settled over her cabin, May sat by her fire thinking about what had happened. She wasn't afraid, as the settlement children might have been. Instead, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in a long time: curiosity. Perhaps even hope. The lonely days that stretched before her suddenly seemed less empty. There were others in these woods, people who might understand her connection to this place between two worlds. May added another stick to her fire and watched the flames dance higher. Tomorrow she would return to the same spot by the stream. Perhaps the woman would be there again. Perhaps not. Either way, May no longer felt quite so alone. As she prepared for sleep, May moved to the small window that faced the river. In the moonlight, she could just make out the silver ribbon of water cutting through the landscape. Beyond it lay the lands where the native people made their homes, a world both foreign and somehow familiar to her. "Good night," she whispered to the darkness beyond her window, speaking to no one and everyone at once. In the morning, May would continue her solitary life, tending her garden, gathering from the forest and making do with what she had. But something had shifted inside her. The glimpse of another person who moved through the woods as she did had awakened something she thought had died with her parents: a desire for connection. As sleep finally claimed her, May dreamed of the river, not as a boundary that separated worlds, but as a path that connected them. In her dream, she stood at the water's edge, looking across to the other side where figures waited, their hands raised in greeting. She didn't know it yet, but this dream was a whisper of what was to come, an adventure that would begin with a chance meeting and end with a line of warriors standing in dawn's early light at her river crossing. 3 days passed since May had spotted the native woman in the forest. Each morning she returned to the small stream, hoping for another glimpse, but the woods remained still except for bird song and the occasional rustle of small animals. On the 4th day, the sky dawned heavy with gray clouds. May stood in her doorway, watching as mist curled between the trees. Rain was coming. She could smell it in the air, feel it in the slight ache of her bones, something her mother had always said was a sure sign of changing weather. Despite the threatening sky, May needed to gather more food. Her supplies were running low, and the berries that grew along the ridge beyond the big oak trees would be ripe for picking. If she hurried, she might return before the rain began. May grabbed her basket and shawl, wrapping the worn fabric around her shoulders as protection against the cool morning air. She secured the door of her cabin with a wooden latch and set off into the forest, moving with the quick confidence of someone who knew every root and hollow. The berry patch lay in a direction she didn't usually travel, closer to native territory than she typically ventured. But the sweet fruits were worth the journey, especially now that her garden had yet to yield its first harvest of the season. As May walked, the forest grew denser, the trees standing closer together. Shadows deepened despite the morning hour, and the air felt heavy with moisture. She began to hear the distant rumble of thunder, still far away but moving closer. "Just enough time," she whispered to herself, quickening her pace. When May reached the berry patch, she worked swiftly. Her fingers stained purple as she plucked the ripe fruit and dropped them into her basket. The first fat raindrops began to fall, splashing against leaves above her head, but the thick canopy still provided some shelter. She had nearly filled her basket when a sound caught her attention. Not the rain or thunder, but something else. May straightened, listening intently. There it was again, a soft sound, almost like a whimper. May set down her basket and moved cautiously toward the noise. Pushing aside a curtain of wet vines, she peered into a small clearing and caught her breath at what she saw. A girl sat huddled against the base of a massive tree, her dark hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She wore a deerskin dress adorned with colorful beadwork, clearly one of the native people from across the river. The girl looked to be about May's age, perhaps a year younger, and she was clutching her ankle, her face twisted in pain. For a moment, May stood frozen, unsure what to do. The settlement people always warned against approaching the natives, filling children's heads with frightening stories. But May's parents had taught her differently. The native girl looked up suddenly, her dark eyes widening with fear as she spotted May. She tried to scramble backward, then winced sharply, unable to move. May raised her empty hands, palms forward, hoping to show she meant no harm. "It's all right," she said softly, though she knew the girl probably wouldn't understand her words. The rain was falling harder now, and thunder cracked overhead. Both girls flinched at the sound. Slowly, May pointed to the girl's ankle, then to herself, trying to ask if she could help. The native girl hesitated, her eyes darting around as if looking for escape. Finally, after another rumble of thunder shook the forest, she gave a small nod. May approached carefully and knelt beside the girl. Gently, she examined the swollen ankle. It didn't appear broken, but the girl certainly couldn't walk on it. Using gestures, May indicated that she wanted to help the girl stand. After another moment of hesitation, the native girl allowed May to slip an arm around her waist. Together, they managed to get her upright, though she balanced on one foot, unable to put weight on the injured ankle. The rain was now coming down in sheets, soaking both girls to the skin. May knew her cabin was too far away in this weather, especially with an injured companion. They needed shelter now. She remembered a hollow beneath a fallen tree not far from where they stood, a place where she sometimes rested during long days of gathering. Using gestures and gentle pulls, May guided the native girl through the downpour toward the makeshift shelter. The hollow was dry and large enough for both of them to sit comfortably. Once settled, May took off her shawl and carefully wrapped it around the native girl's shoulders. The girl looked surprised at this kindness, her dark eyes studying May's face. For a long moment, they sat in silence, two children from different worlds, listening to the storm rage outside their small haven. The native girl was the first to break the silence. She touched her chest and spoke a word, Nima. May understood. She placed her hand over her own heart. May. A small smile crossed Nima's face and she repeated, May. Her voice soft but clear. With the rain trapping them together, the girls began a halting attempt at communication. They used their hands, drawing pictures in the dirt floor of the hollow, pointing to objects around them and sharing their words for each thing. May learned that sky was something that sounded like ahpo in Nima's language, while rain was ahwe. Nima giggled at May's attempts to pronounce these words, but her laughter held no mockery, only friendly amusement. As the afternoon wore on, May gathered that Nima had been collecting medicinal plants when she slipped on wet rocks and hurt her ankle. Her village was across the river, and she had been trying to find her way back when the pain became too much. Through gestures and drawings, May realized something that made her stomach tighten with worry. Nima needed to get back to her people before nightfall. The river that separated their territories was rising with the rain, and soon the crossing would become dangerous, perhaps impossible until the waters receded. May peered out from their shelter. The rain had eased slightly, but the sky remained dark. She pointed to herself, then to Nima, and then in the direction of the river, making a crossing motion with her hand. Nima's face grew serious as she nodded. She understood. Gathering their courage, the girls emerged from the hollow. May retrieved her nearly forgotten basket of berries, then positioned herself as a support for Nima. With one arm around May's shoulders, Nima hopped on her good foot as they began the difficult journey toward the river. The forest floor had become treacherous, slick with mud and debris washed down by the rain. Twice they nearly fell, and by the time they reached the riverbank, both girls were exhausted. What May saw made her heart sink. The normally peaceful river had transformed into a churning, angry mass of brown water. Fallen branches and even small trees rushed past, carried by the current. Nima made a small sound of dismay as she looked at the swollen river. Her village lay on the other side, but the crossing seemed impossible now. May squeezed Nima's hand, trying to reassure her without words. She wouldn't leave this girl stranded and injured. Even if it meant breaking every rule the settlement people lived by, somehow they would find a way across. As they stood there, the rain began to fall harder again and darkness was approaching. May pointed to a large rock formation that offered some shelter, and they huddled beneath it, watching the river rise even higher. In that moment, looking at the dangerous waters before them and feeling Nima trembling beside her, May knew their real journey was just beginning. The simple act of helping an injured stranger had set her on a path she could never have imagined when she woke that morning. And somewhere deep inside, May felt something she hadn't experienced since losing her parents, a sense of purpose, of being needed. Whatever came next, she would not turn back. Night was approaching quickly as May and Nima huddled beneath the rock overhang, watching the angry river swell with rainwater. The constant roar of rushing water filled their ears, making even their attempts at hand speech difficult. Nima's face showed growing worry as she looked across the churning waters toward home. May studied the river with careful eyes. She had lived beside this water all her life and knew its moods and secrets. Even in its fury, there might be a way across if you knew where to look. About 50 paces downstream, the river widened and flowed around a small island of rocks and stunted trees. During normal times, May sometimes waded out to that island to fish from its banks. The water there was usually shallow enough to cross, the current gentler than elsewhere. May pointed to the island and made a series of gestures to explain her plan to Nima. First, they would make their way downstream. Then May would help Nima cross to the island. From there, they could rest before attempting the second crossing to the far bank. Nima's eyes followed May's pointing finger, then widened with understanding. She nodded, though her expression remained fearful. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but darkness was falling fast. They needed to move now while they could still see their way. May helped Nima to her feet, supporting her weight as they began to pick their way along the muddy bank. Progress was painfully slow. Every few steps, Nima needed to rest her good foot. Twice she nearly slipped in the mud, clutching May's shoulder to stay upright. By the time they reached the spot across from the island, both girls were breathing hard, their clothes covered in mud. May looked at the water separating them from the island. In normal times, it would have reached just above her knees. Now it was deeper, maybe to her waist, and flowing much faster. She bit her lip, wondering if her plan was foolish after all. As if understanding her thoughts, Nima squeezed May's arm. When May turned to look at her, Nima nodded firmly, her eyes showing trust that made May's heart squeeze with a strange mixture of pride and fear. This girl from across the river was putting her life in May's hands. May looked around and spotted a fallen branch, long and sturdy. She helped Nima sit on a rock, then retrieved the branch, testing its strength. It would serve as a walking stick, something to help them stay upright against the current. Using gestures, May explained how they would cross together side by side, May on the upstream side to break the current, both holding the branch for support. The water felt like ice when they first stepped in. May gasped at the cold but kept moving, guiding Nima carefully. The current pushed against them immediately, trying to sweep their feet out from under them. May dug the branch into the riverbed, creating an anchor point as they took another step forward. Water rose to their knees, then higher. Soon it reached May's waist, and she could feel Nima trembling beside her, either from cold or fear or both. The current was stronger than May had expected, powerful enough to make every step a struggle. "Steady," May said, though she knew Nima couldn't understand the word. But perhaps the calm in her voice would help. They were halfway to the island when disaster struck. A large branch came rushing downstream, hidden beneath the muddy water until it was almost upon them. It struck their legs with surprising force, knocking both girls off balance. May felt Nima's grip on her arm tighten painfully as they stumbled. For a terrifying moment, it seemed they would both be swept away. But May managed to jam the walking branch between two underwater rocks, creating enough stability for them to regain their footing. Nima's face had gone pale with fear, but she nodded at May's questioning look. They could continue. Step by painful step, they made their way toward the island. When at last May's foot touched the raised ground of the small island, relief flooded through her so strongly that her knees nearly buckled. She helped Nima up onto the relatively dry land, and they collapsed together, breathing hard. The island offered little shelter, just a few scraggly trees and some large rocks, but it was solid ground. May helped Nima to a sitting position against one of the larger rocks, then wrung out her soaking skirt as best she could. Looking across to the far shore, May felt her heart sink. The second crossing looked even more dangerous than the first. The water there moved faster, with small whirlpools forming where it curled around unseen obstacles. And the light was fading quickly now, the setting sun obscured by heavy clouds. Nima followed May's gaze and made a small sound. Not quite a word, but a noise that conveyed understanding of their predicament. They were stuck on the island, at least for now. May sat down beside Nima, their shoulders touching for warmth. The wind had picked up, cutting through their wet clothing and making both girls shiver. They needed fire and dry clothes, but had neither. All they could do was wait, for the rain to stop, for the water to recede, or for help to come from somewhere. As darkness fell completely, May felt a new worry growing. No one knew where they were. The settlement people wouldn't look for May. She often spent days alone in the forest. And Nima's people would have no idea where to search for her, especially in the darkness. Beside her, Nima began to hum softly, a gentle, rising and falling melody that somehow made the darkness feel less threatening. After listening for a while, May joined in, finding the pattern of the simple tune. Their voices blended, creating a small pocket of comfort on their island refuge. When the song ended, Nima reached into a small pouch tied at her waist, something May hadn't noticed before. From it, she pulled a handful of dried berries, offering some to May. May accepted the gift with gratitude. She had left her own basket of berries behind when they began their journey to the river. The sweet tart taste of Nima's offering helped ease the hollow feeling in her stomach. As they shared this small meal, May realized something remarkable was happening. Here they sat, two girls from worlds that never mixed, sharing food and song on an island in the middle of a raging river. The thought made her smile despite their dangerous situation. Nima seemed to sense May's change in mood. She pointed to herself, then to May, and then clasped her hands together. The meaning was clear enough. Together. May nodded and repeated the gesture. Together. They passed the night in fitful sleep, taking turns keeping watch as the water continued to rush around their small haven. Sometime in the early morning hours, May noticed the rain had stopped completely. The clouds began to break apart, revealing patches of star-filled sky. More importantly, the river's roar had lessened slightly. Looking at the water by starlight, May thought it might have dropped a few inches from its highest point. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, May gently shook Nima awake. Together they studied the river crossing ahead of them. The water was still high and fast, but not as terrifying as it had seemed the night before. May found their walking branch where she had wedged it against a rock. It had held through the night, a good sign of its strength. She showed it to Nima, raising her eyebrows in question. Nima looked at the branch, then at the river, then back to May. Slowly, she nodded. She was ready to try the crossing. The rising sun cast long shadows as the girls prepared for the next stage of their journey. May helped Nima to her feet, supporting her as they approached the water's edge. The far bank, Nima's side of the river, waited perhaps 30 paces away. It might as well have been 30 miles given the challenge before them. But something had changed between them during the night. Where before they had been strangers thrown together by chance, now they moved as a team, understanding each other without words. As they stepped into the cold water once again, May felt Nima's trust in her, and her own trust in Nima. Whatever waited on the other side, they would reach it together. The second crossing proved more difficult than the first. The water ran faster here, the current strong enough to make every step a battle. May went first, testing each foothold before helping Nima forward. The walking branch bent alarmingly under their combined weight but held firm. Halfway across, the water reached May's chest, its cold grip stealing her breath. Beside her, the shorter Nima struggled to keep her chin above the rushing water. Her face was a mask of determination, but May could feel her trembling. A mistake now would be fatal. May knew it, and from the tight grip on her arm, she knew Nima understood this too. The far shore seemed impossibly distant, though it couldn't have been more than 15 paces away. One step, May said aloud, though Nima couldn't understand her words. Just one step at a time. As if in answer, Nima nodded, her eyes fixed on the shore ahead. Together, they took another careful step forward. The riverbed beneath them changed suddenly. Where there had been smooth stones, May's foot now slipped on soft mud. She stumbled, pulling Nima with her. For a heart-stopping moment, both girls dipped beneath the surface. May fought against panic as the current tried to tear them apart. Her fingers found Nima's wrist and held on with desperate strength. With her other hand, she kept her grip on their walking branch, which had lodged between underwater rocks. Using the branch as an anchor, May pulled them both up, breaking the surface with a gasp. Nima emerged beside her, coughing and sputtering but still holding tight to May's arm. Almost there, May gasped, though the words meant nothing to Nima. But the tone must have carried her meaning because Nima gave a slight nod. her eyes finding May's with unwavering trust. The last few steps seemed to take forever, each one a battle against the river's strength. And then suddenly the water was only to their knees, then their ankles. With a final surge of effort, they stumbled onto the muddy bank and collapsed on solid ground. For several minutes they simply lay there, too exhausted to move. The morning sun, now fully risen, began to warm their cold skin. Birds called from the trees, their ordinary songs a stark contrast to the life and death struggle the girls had just endured. Nima was the first to sit up. She looked back at the river they had crossed, then at May beside her. A slow smile spread across her face, not just relief, but something like wonder. She reached out and squeezed May's hand, a gesture that needed no translation. They had made it. They were on the native side of the river. May sat up too, taking stock of their situation. They were both soaked to the skin and covered in mud. Nima's ankle was still swollen, though perhaps not as badly as before. And they were in territory May had never entered, the domain of Nima's people. Nima pointed to the east, making gestures that May interpreted to mean her village was in that direction. Not far perhaps, but with Nima unable to walk properly, the journey would take time. May helped Nima to her feet, positioning herself as a human crutch once more. They set off slowly, following what appeared to be a narrow footpath through the trees. As they walked, May felt a growing nervousness. What would Nima's people think when she appeared with a settler girl? The stories May had heard in the settlement painted the native people as dangerous and unpredictable. Though her parents had dismissed such tales, May couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to them. After walking for perhaps an hour, they heard voices ahead. Nima straightened, calling out in her own language. The voices fell silent, and then came the sound of running feet. 3 figures emerged from the trees, 2 boys who looked a bit younger than Nima, and an older woman whose face bore a striking resemblance to Nima's. The woman cried out when she saw Nima's condition, rushing forward to embrace her. May stood awkwardly to one side as a rapid exchange of words flowed between Nima and the others. The boys stared at May with undisguised curiosity, while the woman, Nima's mother, May guessed, kept glancing between her daughter and the strange girl who had brought her home. Nima spoke earnestly, gesturing to May and then to the river. She mimed slipping and hurting her ankle, then showed how May had helped her cross. The woman listened intently, her expression shifting from suspicion to something softer. Finally, Nima's mother approached May. She studied the orphan girl's face for a long moment, then placed a hand over her own heart. "Kinta," she said clearly. May understood. This was Nima's mother introducing herself. May placed her hand over her heart in return. "May," she replied. Kinta nodded, then surprised May by taking her hand. With gentle pressure, she urged May to follow as the boys helped Nima along the path. May hesitated only briefly before falling into step beside them. The village, when they reached it, was both strange and familiar to May. Strange in its circular layout, with rounded dwellings made from bent saplings covered in bark and hides. Familiar in the practical aspects of daily life. Cooking fires, children playing, adults engaged in various tasks. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. People emerged from dwellings and gathered around, voices rising in question and exclamation. May felt dozens of eyes upon her, some curious, others wary or even hostile. An elderly man stepped forward, his bearing dignified and commanding. From the deference others showed him, May guessed he must be an important person, perhaps the leader of the village. He spoke to Kinta, who answered while gesturing toward May and Nima. The atmosphere grew tense as the man approached May. His weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts as he looked down at her. May fought the urge to step back, forcing herself to meet his gaze steadily. Nima broke the silence, speaking rapidly from where she sat with her injured ankle propped on a folded hide. Whatever she said caused murmurs among the gathered people. The elderly man's expression remained unchanged, but he nodded slowly. Kinta touched May's shoulder and guided her toward one of the larger dwellings. Inside it was surprisingly warm and comfortable. Mats woven from reeds covered the floor, and various items hung from the structure's wooden framework. Bundles of dried herbs, tools, clothing, and other household goods. Using gestures, Kinta indicated that May should remove her wet clothes. She provided a soft deerskin dress similar to what Nima wore, though without the colorful beadwork. The foreign garment felt strange against May's skin, but it was dry and warm, a vast improvement over her sodden clothing. When May emerged from the dwelling, she found Nima seated near the central fire. An older woman was tending to her ankle, applying a poultice of crushed leaves that smelled sharply of mint and something else May couldn't identify. Nima smiled when she saw May in the borrowed dress. She patted the mat beside her, inviting May to sit. As May settled next to her, Nima took her hand and squeezed it, then pointed to the woman treating her ankle. "Tala," Nima said. The older woman looked up, studying May with keen eyes that seemed to notice everything. She nodded in acknowledgement, then returned to her work. As the day wore on, May remained by Nima's side. Though they couldn't speak each other's language, they had developed ways to communicate. Gestures, expressions, simple drawings scratched in the dirt. Nima taught May words in her language, laughing gently at May's attempts to pronounce them correctly. The village children gathered to watch this unusual interaction, giggling behind their hands when either girl made a mistake in understanding the other. But there was no cruelty in their laughter, only the natural amusement of children witnessing something new and different. As evening approached, May realized she should be thinking about returning home. Her small cabin would be standing empty, her garden untended, yet the thought of crossing the still-swollen river alone, in gathering darkness, filled her with dread. As if sensing her thoughts, Kinta approached and made a series of gestures that clearly suggested May should stay until morning. The relief May felt must have shown on her face because Kinta smiled and patted her shoulder reassuringly. That night, May slept in Nima's family dwelling, wrapped in soft furs on a mat near the central fire pit. The sounds around her were unfamiliar, the soft conversations in a language she didn't understand. The different rhythm of life in this place so unlike the settlement or her solitary cabin. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, May felt a surprising sense of peace. For the first time since her parents died, she wasn't alone. And somehow, against all odds, she had found connection in the most unexpected place. Across a river she had always been told never to cross. May woke before sunrise, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. The soft sound of breathing nearby reminded her she was in Nima's home across the river in the native village. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the others who still slept. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. May turned to find Kinta, Nima's mother, already awake and gesturing for May to follow her outside. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn as they stepped from the dwelling. The village was quiet, though a few early risers moved about, tending to morning tasks. Kinta led May to a cooking fire where she offered the girl a wooden bowl filled with a warm porridge of grain and berries. May accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger after yesterday's ordeal. As they ate, May noticed the elderly man from yesterday, the one she assumed was the village leader, engaged in conversation with several other men. They spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing in her direction. The serious expressions on their faces made May uneasy. Nima emerged from her family's dwelling, her injured ankle wrapped in a fresh poultice. She moved with the help of a smoothly carved walking stick, making her way carefully to where May sat. The smile Nima gave May was bright enough to chase away her worries, at least for the moment. Using their growing collection of shared gestures and words, Nima explained that May would be returning home today. The river had dropped further overnight, making crossing safer, though still not easy. May nodded her understanding, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. She missed her little cabin, yet the thought of returning to her solitary life held less appeal than before. Their quiet conversation was interrupted when the village leader approached, flanked by two younger men whose muscular builds and serious expressions marked them as warriors. The leader spoke to Nima and Kinta in their language, his tone measured but firm. Nima responded, her words coming quick and passionate. She gestured to May repeatedly, and though May couldn't understand the words, she recognized the sound of someone arguing for something they believed in deeply. The discussion continued with others joining in. May sat silently, wishing she could understand what was being said. From the expressions and tone, it seemed her presence, or perhaps her return journey, was the subject of debate. Finally, the leader raised his hand, silencing the various voices. He spoke a few words that seemed to settle the matter, for Kinta nodded and placed a hand on May's shoulder. Using gestures and the few words they shared, Kinta explained that May would be escorted back to the river crossing. May understood this much, but there seemed to be more that Kinta couldn't convey across the language barrier. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, May prepared to leave. She changed back into her own clothes, now dried by the fire overnight. Nima presented her with a small leather pouch containing dried berries and nuts for the journey. The gift was simple but precious, food freely shared between two people who had been strangers just days ago. May followed Kinta through the village toward the path that led to the river. To her surprise, the two warriors she had seen earlier fell into step behind them. Other villagers joined the procession, including several young men carrying bows and spears. May's unease returned. Why would so many armed men be needed just to see her to the river? Nima hobbled alongside May, leaning on her walking stick. She seemed unconcerned by the growing party of warriors, chatting happily and pointing out various plants and animals, teaching May their names in her language. The walk to the river took less time than May expected. Soon they could hear the water, its voice quieter now as the flood receded. When they reached the bank, May saw that the river had indeed dropped significantly overnight. The island where they had sheltered was clearly visible, and the current, while still strong, no longer looked deadly. But it was what waited on the bank that made May stop in her tracks. More warriors, at least 20 of them, stood in a line along the riverbank. Unlike the men who had accompanied May from the village, these warriors wore paint on their faces and chests, and feathers adorned their hair. Some carried elaborately decorated spears, while others held bows with arrows at the ready. May took an involuntary step backward, bumping into one of the men behind her. Fear bubbled up inside her chest. Had she been led into a trap? Were these warriors planning to attack the settlement? Nima must have sensed May's fear. She touched May's arm and shook her head, pointing to the warriors and then to May, making a protective gesture. Slowly, May began to understand. These men hadn't come to attack, they had come for her. The village leader stepped forward and spoke to the assembled warriors. Though May couldn't understand his words, the pride in his voice transcended language. When he finished speaking, the warriors raised their weapons in unison, not in threat but in what appeared to be salute or honor. One of the warriors, taller than the others and wearing a headdress of eagle feathers, approached May. To her astonishment, he knelt before her, head bowed. When he looked up, his weathered face was solemn, but his eyes were kind. He spoke a few words, then placed his hand over his heart. Kinta stepped forward then. She had brought along a young boy of perhaps 10 years who, she explained through gestures, knew a few words of the settler's language from trading journeys with his father. "He say," the boy began haltingly, "you saved daughter of chief. You brave like warrior. We protect you cross river. We protect your home always." May looked at Nima with new understanding. The girl she had helped was the chief's daughter. No wonder the village had been in such turmoil when they arrived. The chief, for the tall warrior must be Nima's father, rose and gestured to the river. The warriors began to move into position, forming two lines from the bank to the water's edge. The meaning became clear. They would help May cross safely. But before she could step toward the water, Nima pulled something from around her neck, a small pendant carved from pale wood hanging on a leather cord. She placed it around May's neck, then touched her own heart and pointed to May's. The message needed no translation. Friends, perhaps even family now. May hugged Nima tightly, surprised by the tears that sprang to her eyes. She had entered the forest 2 days ago as a lonely orphan. Now she stood surrounded by people who called her brave, who honored her with their protection. With a final wave to Nima, May stepped between the lines of warriors and approached the river. 2 of the strongest men waded in beside her, providing support against the current. The crossing that had nearly claimed her life before now felt almost easy with their help. When they reached the middle of the river, May glanced back. The entire village, it seemed, had gathered on the bank to watch her departure. Nima stood at the front leaning on her walking stick, her free hand raised in farewell. On the far bank, May's side of the river, the warriors helped her to dry land. But they didn't leave immediately as she expected. Instead, they spread out along the bank, standing tall with their weapons displayed prominently. The boy who spoke some of the settlers' language had crossed with them. He explained in his halting way. We stand guard until you safe home. Tomorrow we come at dawn. Stand here. Show all people you friend of chief. May understood then. This display wasn't just for her benefit. It was a message to anyone who might see. The people from the settlement, other native tribes, anyone who passed this way. The orphan girl who lived alone by the river now had protectors. As May walked the familiar path toward her cabin, the weight of loneliness that had been her constant companion since her parents' death seemed lighter somehow. Behind her stood 30 warriors keeping watch until she was safely home. Tomorrow they would return at dawn, standing guard at her river crossing. And across the water lived a girl named Nima, who had become something May had thought she might never have again. A friend. Perhaps even more than that. A bridge between two worlds that had always remained separate before. May touched the wooden pendant at her neck and smiled. The river that had nearly taken their lives had also given them something precious. Not just survival, but connection. And in that connection, May had found a new kind of family,